Welcome, Gunrunner.
It's fair to say that the 32X was a pretty big failure for Sega, and because of that the add-on never got to fulfil its undoubted promise, with lots of games being cancelled, as well as its full console-based form, the Sega Neptune. This stunted life is the reason for its relatively small games library, and given this, and the fact that the 32X is probably best known for its arcade ports like Virtua Racing, Virtua Fighter, Space Harrier, Afterburner and Star Wars Arcade, you'd think that it would be slim pickings when it comes to genuine exclusives. But the 32X actually has a surprisingly solid list of games that are unique to the system, and I think a lot of you will be surprised by this list. But before we get going with the actual games, it would be rather remiss of me not to mention my other videos on the 32X, especially the amazing facts video on the add-on, which will fill you in on a lot of the history behind it and what led to its failure. So if you do want to know more about the 32X itself, and indeed its full console formed sibling, the Neptune, then make sure you check out all the video links listed down in the description. And that's all there is to say here really. I just want to keep this intro short, as I know a lot of you skip them anyway. So let's get on with the show.
Well, Doc, I've been playing that new Virtua Fighter on my Genesis 32X, and it's so realistic, man, you know? Anyway, I've been getting pounded. I thought I should get my head checked out, make sure there's no damage, man. I mean, no more than usual, right, Doc? Anyway, it's got features you can't get on any other system. All the arcade characters, instant replay, 7-cam reviews, man, it works! What was I talking about?
Virtua Fighter on 32X.
Back in the mid-90s, mech games became all the rage for a short time, with titles like Iron Soldier on the Atari Jaguar, Gun Griffin on the Sega Saturn, and Crazy Ivan on the PlayStation. Sega didn't want the 32X to feel left out, so came up with Metalhead, which is an incredibly impressive take on the genre, it has to be said. Like the aforementioned games, this one also uses a mission structure that mostly revolves around hunting down and destroying specified targets. Although there are other more minor tasks that have to be completed too, such as reaching and securing various buildings. A very handy on-screen map helps with the latter, and a panel on the bottom of the screen helps with identifying those targets and other important information. Also, like those other mech games I mentioned, you are equipped with a range of different weapons, including things like machine guns, missiles and giant cannons. Every time you're hit, your armour and shields deplete, so you need to keep an eye on these along with your limited ammo. Everything about Metalhead impresses, from the fully narrated mission briefings to the stunning texture map 3D visuals. This really is a great example of just what the 32X can do in the right hands. It's a shame that this game wasn't ready for launch. If you own the Mushroom add-on, then Metalhead is a real must-have game. Obviously the 32X was released at a time when mascot games were still all the rage. Sega had already promised the add-on would get a Sonic game, which actually turned out to be a spin-off in the form of Knuckles Chaotix, but also wanted to give the 32X a mascot of its very own in the form of Tempo, a cartoon-styled grasshopper with a love for music. In fact, each stage is played out a bit like a musical variety show with people performing around you, an audience cheering, and different sets to add effect. The music aspect of Tempo actually reminded me very much of the classic Mega Drive game Toe Jam and Earl, and the graphical style is fairly similar too, so I wouldn't be surprised if that served as an inspiration during this game's development. Apart from these rather cool stylings, Tempo is a pretty standard platformer where you jump on enemies, collect musical notes, and defeat end of level bosses. That's not to say there are no elements of originality here though, because some of those stage designs in particular are very innovative indeed. For parts of the game, Tempo is also joined by his friend Katie, who acts a lot like Tails in the Sonic games, as she can also fly and will help you where needed. Tempo wasn't the hit that Sega hoped, but it still managed to get sequels on both the Game Gear and Saturn. However, this 32X original is undoubtedly the best of the three. I already mentioned how mech games were all the rage during the era of the 32X, but giant robots in general were all the rage, and fighting games was a natural environment to place them in too. In fact, Sega fans had already experienced the woeful Rise of the Robots on the Mega Drive and the slightly less woeful but still far from impressive Black Hole Assault on the Mega CD, so we were hoping the 32X would finally do the concept justice with the release of Cosmic Carnage. Thankfully for us, we finally got something a lot more playable with proper special moves like Street Fighter 2 and finishing moves like Mortal Kombat, alongside the futuristic mech fighting style we already expected. We have 8 standard characters which are split into 4 good ones called soldiers and 4 bad ones called fugitives, plus some unlockable ones, and all the soldiers can be equipped with different types of armour before you enter battle. In fact, the general style and setup of the game actually saw people comparing it to another popular fighter of the time in Sega's own internal Champions. The graphics and sound are both pretty good, but the Samurai Showdown style zooming effects deserve special credit. This game got pretty mixed reviews on release, and admittedly it's far from perfect, but the 32X doesn't have many fighting games, so Cosmic Carnage is almost an essential purchase by default. One of the first really big hits for Sega in the arcades back in the day was the 3D isometric shoot-'em-up Zaxxon, released in 1982. In fact, that game was particularly notable for its use of pseudo 3D visuals and inspired many people to copy the concept. One group of people who were very influenced by Sega's game were fellow Japanese developers ICOM, who, some 10 years later in 1992, released a game called Viewpoint, which was very much promoted as a modern update of Zaxxon. So when Sega decided to release the 32X, their first system designed with 3D in mind, it seemed only right to resurrect Zaxxon, just as they had done previously for the release of the Master System 3D glasses. And the obvious template for this new version of the game was indeed Viewpoint, so Sega ripped off a rip-off. But whereas Viewpoint just took the visual look of Zaxxon and updated it with new features such as power-ups and end-of-level bosses, Sega's new update went for proper 3D polygons. They did also add another new feature that is even more remarkable, the ability to hijack enemy craft and use them like a power-up. It also adds a very neat head-to-head 2-player mode too, replacing the alternate goes method of the original game. Zaxxon Mother Base 2000 is an interesting update of an all-time classic that brings some clever twists to an already tried and tested concept. Despite having a pretty small games library, the 32X really does present an interesting snapshot into the genres and concepts that were popular back in the mid-90s. We've already had the mascot platformer, the mech game, an update on an arcade classic, and the fighting game that goes double whammy by also throwing in robots too. And now we have a motocross themed racer, another quite specific game style that proved popular around this time too, with rival titles like Supercross 3D on the Atari Jaguar and Dirt Tracks FX on the Super Nintendo. But what Sega's game did that those didn't was add some elements from another very popular motorbike racer of the era by throwing in the fighting abilities from EA's Road Rash franchise. So as you race around the 12 different circuits, you can punch your 11 opponents in the head to try and knock them off their bikes. This gimmick becomes even more fun when you put the game into split screen 2-player mode, so you can beat up your friends too. Like quite a lot of games on this list, Motocross Championship got quite mixed reviews back in the day, and I can certainly see why, as the graphics are pretty messy and the audio isn't great either. But if you can look past its presentation issues, you can have a great deal of fun with this game, especially in the aforementioned multiplayer mode. Also known as Shadow Squadron in North America, no idea why the title was changed for that region, only to be changed back for the European release. This is another game that takes its inspiration from an early 80s classic. In fact, not just one title, but two, as Stellar Assault very much seems to be a merger of two Atari produced classics in both Star Raiders and Star Wars. What this game does is take the open world space exploration elements of Star Raiders and then tone down those exploration elements somewhat in favour of a more arcade focused dogfighting style like Star Wars. Though the gameplay is pretty tried and tested, there are lots of little features that help elevate Stellar Assault from many of the similar games available at this time, such as the multiplayer mode where one of you acts as the gunner and the other the pilot, the different types of ship and the clever weapon system that makes it easier to target enemies. There's also the ability to add an autopilot, so you can just concentrate on shooting down the enemies to create an even more arcade-like experience. Given the previously mentioned influences, I was also interested to learn that Stellar Assault was actually designed as an update to the Sharp X68000 game Star Wars Attack on the Death Star, and made by the same team. With its smooth 3D graphics, excellent music and great gameplay, there's an awful lot to enjoy here. It's very appropriate that this game appears here, because if you rewind to this time last year, you'll see me include its prequel, The Amazing Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, in my Sega Mega CD Exclusives video. Subtitled The Web of Fear, this sequel features some very similar gameplay, with its mix of fighting and arcade adventure aspects, all tied together with a strong story-driven narrative. It's also notable for being the very last Sega 32X game released in North America, before it was discontinued in favour of the Saturn. A fitting end to the underrated add-on, I'm sure you'll agree. This game features 6 levels of side-scrolling action as you go up against the evil terrorist organisation Hydra, who has taken the whole of New York City hostage, surrounding it with an electrified force field, hence the title. Like the previous game, the plot is explained in advance via news reports, and a different Hydra henchman is introduced with each level. Each one must be beaten to disable the so-called Ring of Fire, and this is done by combining the usual physical attacks like punching and kicking with various web-slinging exploits. Spider-Man can also get assistance from fellow Marvel superhero Daredevil by first rescuing him in the opening stage and then collecting the DD tokens scattered through the subsequent levels. What we have here is a definitive 32X must-have. And from the last North American 32X release to the last Sega published European release, only Time Warner's Primal Rage came after, with Darkside, which is yet another game inspired by an early arcade classic. Upon release, Darkside was described by the gaming press of the era as Asteroids in 3D, and it certainly shares a lot in common with the vector-based Atari arcade game, as the key element of each level is destroying all the space rocks. In fact, almost every element of this game is the same, well, except for the way it's presented, as you also have to destroy UFOs that appear too. And like the later Asteroid sequel Blasteroids, you can also collect power-ups. There are a couple of aspects that are different though. Firstly, some of the giant space rocks have miners inside them, so when you smash them, the helpless workers float off into space and require you to rescue them. And secondly, each level is timed, and if the blue moon appears before you finish your task, you lose a life. One of the most fascinating aspects of Darkside is that one of the designers of the game is none other than David Braben, creator of Elite, who has previously said that the game was his attempt to create a space game that was less involved and more arcade-like. And I'd say that he succeeded, as Darkside is a great looking game with plenty of great gameplay on offer too. Almost as soon as the 32X was announced, Sega confirmed it would be getting a Sonic game, and people were pretty excited. However, Sega soon revealed that the game would in fact be a spin-off that carried on somewhat from Sonic and Knuckles, and starring the latter of those two characters, giving him his first and only solo outing. It also has an interesting history because it actually started off as a Mega Drive game called Sonic Crackers that was then moved to the Saturn and then to the 32X, where it finally settled in its existing form. The gimmick that sets this game apart from all the other Sonic games that came before it is the tethering mechanic. That means you're always connected to another player and cannot progress through the game without controlling them in unison. Each player has their own unique abilities, with Knuckles being able to glide and climb walls, Mighty the Armadillo can perform wall jumps, SBO the Chameleon can run along walls and ceilings, Vector the Crocodile can boost through the air and climb walls, Charmy B can fly and hover, and there are two extra characters called Heavy the Robot and Bomb, who hinder players' progress due to their slow and destructive natures respectively. This certainly makes Chaotix feel very different to other Sonic games, even if the core gameplay is pretty similar. I liked this change personally, but I know not everyone does. I wanted to save this one until last because it's probably my favourite game for the 32X, and a lot of that is down to how beautiful this game looks. The 32X might have been an add-on that was designed with 3D graphics in mind, but it sure did some stunning 2D games too, and this is the best looking one of the lot. I certainly wasn't shocked to discover that the developer of Calibri was none other than Novo Trade, of Echo the Dolphin fame, because it shares the same kind of visual flair and is also animal based too, of course. The main star of the game is a hummingbird. Calibri is actually the name for this feathered friend in many European languages, who is out to save Earth from destruction. This takes the form of an otherwise pretty standard horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up, where you shoot down enemies, collect power-ups and defeat bosses in true arcade style. But it's the incredible visual experience that sets this one apart from everything else out there. The stunning backdrops and beautifully animated sprites were also accompanied by some incredibly atmospheric sound and music too, another feature it shares with Echo, and each level has its own unique theme. It's a shame we never got to see a sequel to this game, especially on the Saturn, which had even more powerful 2D abilities, as Calibri kind of got hidden away in the mostly unknown library of the mushroom-shaped add-on.
I love the game. If I don't stop playing it, my wife is going to kill me.
You're in this dark, nasty place? Pretty disgusting.
Now on 32X.
It makes me sweat.
Welcome to the world of doom. A hellish nightmare for the more real, the more intense world of Genesis 32X.
It takes my mind off work.
Just one of the astounding new games for the machine 6 times more powerful than 3DO.
And that one's on my look at 10 amazing Sega 32X exclusives. Which games impressed you the most here? Well, are there any games that you don't think were worthy of inclusion on this countdown? Do you have some suggestions of your own? We also love to hear the thoughts and views of my audience, so please get typing in that comment section. Before I go though, I must thank all of my loyal patrons and YouTube backers for continuing to support my channel and make videos like this possible. However, I must give special thanks to the following people in particular for their much appreciated pledges: Paul Daniel, Mins, Dos Gamerman, Luke MC, Carl Olsen, Seth Robinson, Frosty, Mark Strickland, Klimatorn, Trogdor the Burninator, Daniel Skronsky, Ben P. Stein, Tabby Kitsune, David Maddox, Your Eyes Are Bleeding, Joe Casara, Classic Gamer 74, Bernard Santu, Peter Grantham, Noah Mann, and Electron Star Collapse. If you also want to help support all my creative endeavours, including this YouTube channel, then please go and check out my Patreon right now, where you can get access to host extra content including downloads, exclusive videos, creative insights, and much more besides. I've been the Laird, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you all again for another video very soon.